Every other civilization in the Americas eventually fell. One did not. The Inca stopped at a river, the Spanish stopped at a river, the Chileans needed an army, a railroad, and repeating rifles, and it still took them 22 years. Most people outside South America have never heard their name, the Mapuche. In the late 1400s, the largest empire in the Americas marched south out of the Andes. The Inca had swallowed everything in their path: Chimu, Aymara, the kingdoms of the Ecuadorian coast. General Sinchiruca led an army that eventually numbered 50,000 men down through the dry valleys of northern Chile. The Picunche fell, the Diaguita fell, the Aconcagua Valley fell. Then the Inca crossed the Maule River and walked into something that did not behave like any enemy they had ever fought. The Mapuche had no emperor, no capital city, no tribute system, no central leader to capture or kill. They lived in clusters of extended families across forested valleys, autonomous, decentralized, and unified only when threatened. This, it turned out, was not a weakness. It was the single most effective defense against empire ever devised on the continent. Because you cannot conquer what has no head. According to the chronicler Garcilaso de la Vega, 18,000 Mapuche and allies met the Inca advance at the Maule. The battle lasted 3 days. Neither side broke. Both lost more than half their men. On the 7th day, the Mapuche walked home claiming victory. The Inca never crossed that river again. Modern historians debate the details. What they do not debate is the outcome. The Inca Empire, which held everything from Ecuador to northern Chile, stopped at the edge of Mapuche country and never advanced another step south. 40 years later, a different army arrived.
Pedro de Valdivia had helped Francisco Pizarro destroy the Inca. Now he came for what the Inca could not take. He built cities on Mapuche land: Concepcion, Valdivia, Villarica, Imperial. Forts at Arauco, Paren, Tucapel. He opened a gold mine at Quillacoya and forced Mapuche laborers into it. And in his own household, as a stable boy, he kept an 11-year-old Mapuche captive he had renamed Felipe Lautaro. The boy watched everything: how the Spanish rode, how they charged, how they broke, what exhausted them, what they did when outnumbered. In 1551, Lautaro escaped. 2 years later, the Mapuche held a council. They chose a war chief, a Toki named Caupolicán, and they chose Lautaro as his second. Because Lautaro was the only one among them who knew exactly how a Spanish column moved. On Christmas Day, 1553, Valdivia rode toward the fort at Tucapel with 50 men. He found the fort already burning. He set up camp in the ruins. Then the forest came alive. Lautaro sent his warriors in waves, not all at once, in timed shifts, fresh men replacing the tired ones, hour after hour. The Spanish cavalry broke the first charge, and the second, and the third. Then their horses were too exhausted to charge again. Lautaro had studied this. He had watched Valdivia's horses in their stables as a child. He knew exactly how long they could fight. Every Spaniard died in the forest that day, except 2. Valdivia was captured alive and executed. He had conquered Chile. His former stable boy had just killed him with his own tactics. What happened next defined the next 3 centuries. The Mapuche did not celebrate and retreat. They adapted. Within a single generation, they had their own cavalry.
They captured Spanish horses and bred them. They captured Spanish steel and reforged it. They built the first indigenous cavalry corps in the Americas. They kept their forests. They kept their decentralized clans. But now they rode into battle. For 45 years, the war ground on. Spanish forts burned. Spanish governors were replaced. New conquistadors arrived from Peru and died in the same forests. On December 21, 1598, Governor Martin Garcia Oñez de Loyola camped without sentries at a place called Curalaba, Broken Stone. The Toki Pelantaru came out of the dark with 300 mounted warriors. The governor died in his tent. Over the next 6 years, the Mapuche destroyed all 7 Spanish cities south of the Biobío River: Imperial, Angol, Santa Cruz, Valdivia, Osorno, Villarica, Cañete. Gone, every one of them, burned to the ground. The Spanish retreated north of the Biobío and never successfully crossed it again. By 1641, Spain had been bleeding in Mapuche country for nearly 100 years. The empire needed its resources for the war in Catalonia. So, on January 6th, Spanish officials and Mapuche loncos met in a grass field at Quilín. No document was signed. Mapuche agreements were not signed. They were sealed with embraces, with gifts, with spoken oaths in both languages. King Philip IV ratified it 2 years later. The Biobío was now the recognized border between the Spanish Empire and Mapuche territory. Historians still argue over what exactly the Mapuche conceded in the Spanish written record. What is not arguable is what happened on the ground. For the next 200 years, the river held. 10 million hectares of forest and valley remained under Mapuche control, independent, self-governed, trading with the Spanish across a recognized frontier. When Chile declared independence in 1818, the border was still there. In 1825, the new Chilean Republic signed a treaty at Tapihui reaffirming it. Then, slowly, the new country broke its own promise.
Between 1861 and 1883, the Chilean army, armed now with repeating rifles the Spanish had never possessed, moved south. They called it the pacification of Araucanía. The Mapuche called it what it was. By 1883, the war was over. 90% of Mapuche land was gone. Survivors were confined to reservations on the poorest soil. But here's the part the story usually leaves out. The Mapuche did not vanish. Nearly 2 million people in Chile today are Mapuche, the largest indigenous group in the country. They still speak Mapudungun. They still hold Koyang, parliaments in the old way. And in the Araucanía region right now, they are still fighting for the land the Treaty of 1641 promised them. Sometimes in the courts, sometimes in the streets, sometimes against the same forestry companies clear-cutting the forests where Lautaro once ambushed cavalry. No other people in the Americas defeated the Inca, fought the Spanish Empire to a treaty, and are still at the table 5 centuries later. The story is not that they won every battle. They did not. The story is that they are still here, arguing over the same river, the same forests, the same question of whose land this is. And the question, 500 years in, has never been fully answered.